What's up, everybody? Welcome to the newest episode of Demo Day, the podcast for entrepreneurs and venture capitalists, where we demystify the culture of joining one of the top accelerator, incubator, or VC programs from around the world. I'm your host, Shaun CEO of Coefficient Labs, and on today's show, we'll be interviewing Shaun Arora, Managing Director of Make in LA and an angel investor in the LA tech ecosystem. At Make in LA, Shaun is cultivating a community to help founders scale and avoid both common and uncommon pitfalls in bringing hardware to market. Shaun covers what it was like building his own startup, problems that he sees other founders face in their earliest days, and why now is the best time for entrepreneurs to build hardware startups in Los Angeles. Also, Coefficient Labs is giving away a $10,000 growth hacking package for one VC and one founder that leaves a rating and a review on the Apple Podcast. So if you're listening to this on podcast or watching it on our website, go check out the Apple Podcast, leave us a review, and you have a chance at winning. Without further ado, let's get into Demo Day. Shaun, thank you so much for coming on the show with us today.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So we always like to, sort of build some context around the guests we have on the show. And, as with most podcasts, tend to like to start with sort of what was early life like for you and, bring us back to the early days. I know before we started on the podcast, we talked a little bit about your radio days and sort of how music has played a part in your life. Where did you grow up? And tell the viewers and listeners a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, I'm an LA native. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley. After 18 years, I wanted to get out of town, so I moved to St. Louis, Missouri, went to college there, did my undergrad. I was a dorky computer science kid, always a little bit of an outcast, which I think a lot of founders could relate to. In St. Louis, I fell in love with consumer insights, and I became a cultural anthropologist, helping liquor companies figure out how to best target their media, their messaging to increase their sales.
When did you first have access to a computer? Can you remember the earliest time that you were playing around with sort of technology?
Mac SE, so that was 85. My father brought it home, and it was just one of those magical moments.
And when you, at what age did you start to utilize your knowledge of computers and engineering and start to focus more on business? Was it when you were in college, or was it even before that?
Even before that. So I got into coding in high school, in junior high actually. But in high school, it really took off, and I was making apps on my TI-82 calculator. It was like a graphic calculator. You can make small little apps and programs, and I would sell those to other students on campus. I
remember that the TI-83 was when students started to cheat in their high school classes and make little programs. So I remember that calculator very well. Did you always know that you wanted to move into venture and into helping startups, or did that come later on in your life?
Yeah, no, it's just something I kind of fell into. It's like the Steve Jobs commencement speech where he said, in hindsight, it all kind of made sense, but learning typography, learning all these different fields, it didn't make sense at the time. He just went to whatever felt comfortable.
Meaning you can only, right? He said you can only connect the stars looking, you can only connect them looking back, yeah. Connect the dots looking backwards, right? Yes. Yeah, you can never connect them looking forwards.
Exactly. Yeah, so I just went with whatever excited me. So I was excited about consumer insights, cultural anthropology. I was excited about mentoring. I launched 2 nonprofits focused around inner city youth. And it was all fun, but then I got pulled into the manufacturing world. I got into manufacturing. That's why Make in LA is focused on hardware, because I fell in love with the manufacturing ecosystem in Los Angeles. And while I was building a hardware company in Los Angeles, I felt insecure as a leader. So I started to work with more startups and try to understand how those leaders are facing challenges similar to mine. And I learned a lot from those entrepreneurs.
What sort of, if you don't mind, can we talk more about the insecurities you felt as a leader? I think that a lot of the people that watch this show are either founders that are thinking about joining an accelerator program, founders that are currently in one, but Time and time again, whenever we talk to founders of startups, they oftentimes talk about transferring from being a team member or a manager into a leader. What does being a leader mean to you, and what did you learn about yourself in those early days of running your first startups?
Well, initially, it was a challenge to be a leader because it's very isolating, and you don't have a community. That's why I love running the accelerator. I love what's happened to the ecosystem now. You have co-working spaces where you have leaders able to exchange ideas with other leaders. That's what YPO tried doing back in the day, and EO and all these other executive organizations where you get leaders together to exchange ideas. For me, it was fairly lonely, and so a lot of it was trying to figure out what to share with your team and what to keep inside yourself. You don't want to say that, holy crap, our business is going to run out of money in the next 24 hours. You keep some of that to yourself. Some of that you do end up saying when you really need to motivate people. Say, hey, our business is running out in the next 24 hours unless we do X, Y, and Z, versus all the typical insecurities, the lawsuits, or whatever else is going on in running a typical business.
Yeah, I think that people and founders oftentimes hear the concept of it's lonely at the top, but I think that it feels a lot different when you're in that position. It's very easy to say it, but certainly when you're going through that and you have people's lives at stake and you're trying to support them, I can imagine and feel myself running Coefficient Labs, the responsibility and pressure and loneliness that you can feel in some of those pressure moments. When did you decide to transition from, basically leading and running your own company or your own startup to start to move towards this accelerator mindset and really helping companies and being a mentor to them as opposed to necessarily being the one that's running the show?
Right. So when I really enjoyed running the business at the 20, 30, $100 million level. Once we got to over 600 employees, it became less fun because the job of the leader transforms. It goes from one where you're able to immediately affect change to one where you're really working through other people to help them to work through other people to affect change. So there's all these different layers, and me being a very impatient person, I didn't enjoy it that much. I wanted to work in smaller companies. So I started transitioning out at that point, and I was able to transition fully about 4 to 5 years later.
And what is it for people that have been in a similar position as you and are thinking about, maybe they're an associate at a VC fund, maybe they're thinking they've come out with an exit and have always wanted to put together their own accelerator. What's it like to put together a fund an accelerator from the very, very beginning? What was going through your mind back in the early days?
I was very naive. It's really probably one of the most idiotic things you could do because you're running up against a lot of walls. First off, there's a lot of accelerators out there, so there's a little bit of accelerator fatigue. Second, we wanted to run the accelerator at no cost to entrepreneurs, which meant we had to create a venture fund. Venture funds are generally created by people who are already at venture funds who spin off their own funds. So being an emerging manager is a completely different landscape, and trying to talk to family offices and fund of funds and all these limited partners out there who invest in venture is definitely a challenge, a very rewarding challenge, but it is really, really tough.
What recommendations do you have for other venture capitalists that are trying to decide between going to family funds, going to other LPs? For people that are in their first 2 to 3 years of venture, what recommendations do you have for them, or maybe some pitfalls that you have overcome in your early days?
Well, the recommendation that I have would be, regardless of the background, it helps to build a business. So there are some people that go straight from college into venture. These are finance people. And when you take a board seat, you're trying to express some sort of opinion. You're trying to do some pattern matching. But at the end of the day, if you haven't operated a business, you don't have the same level of empathy for the founder as an operator who's in venture. I love engineers and operators in venture. It's a very different mindset than the financial people.
Now, talk to us a little bit more about Make in LA, because you just mentioned how there's so many different accelerators. We've talked to Techstars and Quake and Luma and so many different companies that are trying to find their niche. Who is Make in LA? What are you guys about? And tell us a little bit more about what your mission is and what you're trying to do over at Make in LA.
Sure. So we started 4 years ago. It was 2015, and at that time there was a boom in consumer hardware. We saw a lot of companies, a lot of entrepreneurs say, I want this to exist. And if you go back 20, 30 years ago, they wouldn't be able to make it, or it would be incredibly expensive. They might have to work for many years at Xerox or IBM, and maybe they would get access to a lab, and maybe they'll be able to tinker with this type of product, or maybe they'll save enough money where they could work with various partners in the supply chain. But thanks to technologies like Raspberry Pi, cloud computing, a lot of chips have empowered people to make prototypes. You can make one really, really easily. I could go home right now and make a smart thermostat or a smart doorbell. So the barriers are gone for prototyping. And a lot of these entrepreneurs said, it was so easy for me to make one. Why can't I just make this over and over again and mass produce this and sell this? So we saw this big boom in Kickstarter campaigns, and these entrepreneurs would come to me because of my hardware background and say, hey, could you help me manufacture this? And I would say, no, your credit stinks. You spend way too much money and time on this. You have a long way ahead of you, and it's really difficult for me to help you with the tools I have. Why don't you go look for other people who could help you, go approach venture capital? And there weren't a lot of options out there. So we said, okay, we need to start figuring this out ourselves. And that's where the idea of Make in LA started to be born. We started gathering these experts all over LA. LA has amazing talent from battery technology, medical devices, rockets. All these incredibly smart people who understand hardware. They understand thermal expansion. They understand physics. But they weren't contributing back to the ecosystem. There was no center of mass for these entrepreneurs. So we created a space and a program to attract these type of people so that they are able to advise entrepreneurs, help them avoid these mistakes. I have this Rolodex that I still keep to this day, and it has all these different contractors. And anytime someone says, hey, I'm thinking about working with this firm, I'm thinking about working with that firm, I could go through this and say, hey, this person worked here, here's their feedback. It's kind of like I have like this giant Yelp or this giant Rolodex of different service providers where I could say, if you go to this person, expect to overpay, expect to not get the products or services that you want. Whereas if you're a first-time entrepreneur, we had these first-time entrepreneurs get seduced because that guy had a McLaren in his parking lot, so he must be successful.
And so within that regard, is that one of the big pitfalls that happens in the hardware space, that because these entrepreneurs have such good ideas to make the prototype, they don't necessarily know how to take it to scale? What are some of the other problems that you've seen for hardware startups, maybe that are, maybe 2 employees to 5 employees, but they haven't really crossed that threshold? What's some of the things that they're going to have to run into as their days, months, years continue to go on?
There's a lot of challenges. So first, I would say, is the storytelling aspect. A lot of these entrepreneurs have made a product solving a personal problem. And it's great that you could solve a problem for yourself. If you're trying to make a bigger company, if you're trying to go to mass manufacturing, you're going to have to amortize all your non-recurring expenses. That means that you need to figure out how to sell a bigger product, how to sell it to more people. So storytelling is incredibly important for these entrepreneurs. And if you're coming out of an engineering mindset and you aren't as familiar with storytelling, we love helping those type of people out. Oftentimes it's just unlocking something inside them and having them talk to different customers, and they just get excited by, oh my God, this is so much bigger than I ever thought it could be.
When you think about what Make in LA could become over the next several years, where do you see it going from now? I mean, it's clearly now over the last 4 or 5 years been continuing to build momentum. What would a success look like for you as you think deeper down the road over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. So going back to your other question, we talked about the challenges for hardware entrepreneurs. The other is capital. So there are these hot companies that raise a lot of money, and then they spend a lot of money, and then because they spend all that money, then they might have a down round, or they might have blown up, and the ecosystem says hardware is too expensive. And my goal is to change that. If companies are more strategic about how they raise money, if they take it in different tranches, if they spend that money wisely, then hardware doesn't have to be capital intensive. We have this one company that got to about $10 million in sales after raising under $2 million. And it's hard for SaaS companies to get to that scale. Hardware can be done incredibly capital efficiently if you don't make mistakes, if you do things in a very smart way.
Are there any companies that, either are currently in Make in LA, or just companies in general in the hardware space that you think are doing it right, or that you think are positioning themselves for, a big growth over the next, let's say, 1 to 2 years?
Yeah, sure. Could I pick on my own companies?
Of course, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, tell us about some of the ones you're really excited about.
Great. Yeah, so one of my favorite companies is Amped Innovation. Don't tell the others.
Okay.
But what I like about this company, they make solar power systems for the developing world.
Okay.
And there's a lot of companies out there that could just take a solar panel and a battery system and deploy it in Ghana or in Southeast Asia. What they've done is figure out how to design for extreme affordability, so they're able to get the price of electricity down to parity with kerosene. So you're getting all these people who are currently using kerosene to read at night to switch over to electricity. Now that you've got people to switch over to electricity, you could upsell them by charging an extra 10 cents a month or extra 20 cents a month on something that's going to be a productive use appliance. So they could get a maze grinder and they could start to monetize that. They could get a television, and this team's designing their own products from scratch. Because you're using solar power, it makes sense that all these appliances are designed in the DC world. So there's this opportunity to lock in a customer, to sell them on innovative products, to move them out of poverty into the middle class, and then ideally that company could end up transforming the way that we live in this country. Because the more that we start using renewable fuels, the more it makes sense that we start to make a transition over to DC power. And some of the stuff that we're using right now is incredibly inefficient.
It's so cool because hardware startups have such an impact on day-to-day physical lives, and so do SaaS startups as well. But you can see, especially when it comes to the developing world, I can imagine for someone like yourself being a part of helping those companies grow and then seeing them actually helping thousands of people must feel absolutely amazing for you to be a part of that for them.
Yeah, it's pretty freaking cool.
When you what advice do you have? I'm sure you meet hundreds of entrepreneurs that would love to be involved in your program or would love to, meet you or get time from you. What do you look for in founders that you think, this guy or gal is going to make it? I feel really good about them. What are the traits or the attributes that you look for in successful winning entrepreneurs?
Well, I want to caveat that with saying that venture capitalists and accelerators are wrong more than they're right. So I might be looking for something big. The vast majority of a venture capitalist portfolio is going to be companies that fail. So what we look for in particular, though, is because we're investing so early in a company's life cycle, they have a prototype, but they haven't figured out product market fit. We're looking for someone that is curious, that they're going to ask a lot of questions, we have to have conviction that, sure, they might have some sense of product market fit today, but that they're going to find it. And when the ecosystem changes, when the environment changes around them, they're going to pivot to wherever it makes sense for that business to be. We see a lot of companies that maybe start in consumer and go enterprise or vice versa. And having the dexterity to move between those worlds is really helpful for the entrepreneur. So we look for curiosity and coachability.
Can you talk more about conviction? I hear we've talked to multiple VCs that talk just about conviction, the importance of knowing that this is my path and my journey. Do you believe that conviction is something that comes like organically, like people just have it or they don't, or do you think that conviction comes through something else? And if it does come through something else, how do entrepreneurs get better at communicating how they think or articulate the way they think to venture capitalists?
Well, I don't see it as being black and white. So when I think about conviction, I think about where does it make sense to be stubborn and where does it make sense to be flexible? We had an entrepreneur that was trying to make a product, and we said, hey, instead of showing, he was doing a display product, instead of showing artwork on it, how about showing TV shows? And it's like, no, this is not a television. This is meant for art. So having certain types of conviction helps on the product side is incredibly important. We like investing in people that have a strong product vision. Where conviction gets tricky is when you're flying the plane and it's crashing and you're saying, I'm not gonna pull up. I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing.
Your ego or your emotional side is not allowing you to kind of take that step back and see things the way they are.
There's a fine line between confidence and arrogance. And so we look for a level of confidence, but I think a lot of entrepreneurs have an ability to close off that insecurity and just say, I'm going to plow through, I'm just going to push forward. I've been right so many times, I'm going to keep doing this, even though everyone else and all the signals are saying, hey, this is wrong. And it's important to be able to take a step back and just say, hey, this is what I think. I feel like I have strong confidence on this. Someone prove me wrong. Someone play devil's advocate. Someone play black hat, red hat, like the de novo six hats model. Someone play that role for me and tell us why we're wrong.
Do you see any correlation in this scenario between single founders versus like co-founders, where people have someone to bounce ideas off of or have someone to sort of play versus those that don't?
Yeah. Y Combinator, Techstars, we all like to have more than one founder. in our programs. And there's been exceptions for all of us, but what we see is when you have multiple founders there, you'll be in a conversation with a potential customer or mentor or whoever, and two people will hear two different things. If it's only one person, it's easy to only hear what you want to hear and
The
dismiss
bias,
it.
right?
Exactly. When you have two people, maybe there's something like a gem of an idea there that one person heard one thing, one person heard another, and then you just build from that.
So meaning that you've seen that because startups can be so chaotic, because there's so many decisions that need to be made, sometimes having a balance amongst the co-founding team can help when it comes to this idea of being too confident or being too, this sort of, you've seen that having that level is a good thing as opposed to being a bad thing.
Yeah, and I would equate it to like speed of learning, speed of execution. So the faster you're able to learn from your mistakes, the faster you're able to learn from your customers, the better off you'll be. And if you keep on rejecting certain ideas and not having another person keep you in check, then it'll slow you down. When you go through an accelerator, you want to move as quickly as possible. Having 2-3 people in most of your meetings helps you to accelerate. Even though it seems inefficient, it definitely helps.
So we talk about conviction and the importance of really putting your all into it. What are some of the missteps? What are some of the areas where entrepreneurs have gone the wrong direction for you and you've thought, I don't think this is the right fit for us? Said another way, for anyone that has a hardware startup that's listening to this podcast, what's the way that they should not be approaching Make in LA and maybe accelerators in general?
So I would just take it from the Make in LA standpoint because I think every accelerator is different. One of the things that we caution entrepreneurs to do is to not overraise, not underraise. If you raise too much money, you have a tendency to spend your way out of a problem instead of solving it. And too much of that muscle of spending instead of solving creates major problems where instead of spending maybe $2 million to bring to market a vending machine, you're spending $100 million.
Why? I read on your website that there are really these 5 core principles that Make in LA cares about. Can we talk a little bit more about the importance of each of them? What does being a curious founder mean to you? We just talked a little bit about that, but why is curiosity the number one core value for Make in LA?
Well, I think it's the number one thing that we look for in our founders, just because there's so many roads ahead for the founders that we invest in. They have a prototype, but there's a long journey ahead, and it's important to be curious. It's important to absorb feedback as quickly as possible, learn and iterate.
What does it mean to you to be a principled founder?
It means that you have there's a lot of different ways that we've been talking about this. Initially, it was around morals and ethics. Recently, it's been turned to diversity, encouraging, and including different opinions into every single conversation, not just opinions of your team, but also of the end customers.
So principle number 3 is creative. And I can imagine that so many of your founders, because they're hardware, like they're naturally creative people. But what does it mean at a deeper level to be a core principle when you say, being creative is one of the keys here? What does being creative mean to you?
Well, creative is another, the way that we look at creativity is around empathy, that when you're having a conversation with a customer, you're understanding what that customer wants, and they're saying, these are my problems. Being creative means to us that you're able to identify that problem and then come up with a solution to solve it.
Awesome. To be hungry. Why must an entrepreneur be hungry to be successful at Make in LA?
Because there's a lot of hungry people out there that want to do the same type of thing. Ideas have been democratized. And so just having a good idea, having people that came out of a great university is not enough these days. You have to be hungry. You have to want it more than the next person.
And let's end with number 5, confidence. What does confidence mean to you?
Well, we like to talk about confidence instead of arrogance. So confidence means that you have certain convictions on key areas, but you're not... if there's a better idea, you're open-minded to that.
Shaun, where, what are the types of entrepreneurs that you would like to see applying more to Make in LA? So you could answer this. If you're the type of entrepreneur that blank, who would you be talking to? And if there's anyone that's listening that might be the right fit, who would they be?
Yeah, sure. So we invest in companies that are building something physical. So that could be things like high heel shoes and rockets. It could be a wearable, robotics. If you are a founder that is making something in the physical world, You've created a prototype, come see us. If it's too expensive to create a prototype, create a proof of concept and then come see us. We try to make ourselves as accessible as possible. So our email addresses are available. We answer LinkedIn, Twitter. We also have a form on our website where you could just submit it. I look at all the companies that send their pitch decks through the Make in LA website and the MiLA Capital website.
And for last couple questions here, Shaun, if you were to join the Make in LA startup, if I was to join the Make in LA startup, what's kind of the program like? Do we have space there with other founders and entrepreneurs? Do we meet every couple weeks? What's sort of the setup, and what would I expect if I was to join?
So I talked about how lonely it is to be a leader. We work really hard to create a sense of community. So you're there for 4 months. During those 4 months, on-site programming is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That gives you a 4-day weekend to be wherever you need to be, whether that's customer visits or that's at a conference, wherever it is. So during those 3 days, what's life like? It's intense. We've had entrepreneurs spend the first week with us and say, holy crap, it feels like I've been here for a year. A lot of accelerators do, like for example, Y Combinator, they have the weekly programming and then lots is virtual. A lot of our programming is on-site. We have so many incredible resources in Los Angeles. We bring them to our location. We have them work hands-on with the entrepreneurs. Our 3 partners are working hands-on with our partners. Our 3 partners are working hands-on with the entrepreneurs as well during the program. So you're on-site around 7, 8, 9 a.m. You're leaving every single day around 8, 9 p.m.
Wow. So it is, for those that are listening, I think that, joining an accelerator program or joining a incubator program, from what I've heard, is as much about the community and the people that you're around and the energy in the room as it is about, having this opportunity to get venture, to get some funding. I think that, having been in Mucker myself for some time, just being around other people that are pushing themselves is such an incredible opportunity. And Shaun, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast. Where can people find you, and where do you most communicate on the socials?
Yeah, sure. So I am on Twitter at Shaun from LA. You could also email me, Shaun@makeinla.com.
Awesome. Guys, from everyone that's watching the podcast Demo Day, thank you so much. Shaun, I really appreciate you, man. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. What's the sort of KPI or metrics that you're looking for that actually get you excited?
Yeah, so it's going to be the way they articulate the idea, how much I believe in the idea, probably what I just think about the market in general.